When the Great Invasion came, when the Allied armies stormed ashore to begin the liberation of occupied Europe, they faced a problem that threatened to undo the entire enterprise. An invading army does not just need to land on a beach. It needs to be supplied, continuously and in enormous quantities, with everything an army requires to fight: the food, the fuel, the ammunition, the vehicles, the reinforcements, and the supplies needed to sustain an army of that size could not flow across open beaches indefinitely. They needed a port, a harbor where ships could dock and unload their cargo efficiently. But the enemy held all the ports, and the ports were among the most heavily defended positions of all. The Allies faced a dilemma that seemed almost insoluble until they arrived at one of the most audacious engineering solutions of the entire war. If they could not capture a harbor, they would bring their own. This is the story of the artificial harbors that the Allies built and towed across the sea. This is a story about engineering on a colossal scale, about a solution so bold and so unconventional that it seems almost beyond belief. It is a story about the recognition that some problems cannot be solved by conventional means, and that audacious thinking can find a way where conventional thinking sees only an impasse. And it is a story about one of the great unsung achievements of the war, an engineering feat that made possible the success of the greatest invasion in history. To understand the magnitude of this achievement, you have to understand the problem it solved. The Great Invasion of occupied Europe involved landing a massive army on the beaches of a defended coast. But landing the initial force was only the beginning. To sustain that army, to allow it to fight and advance, an enormous and continuous flow of supplies was required. An army of that size consumed vast quantities of everything, and all of it had to be brought across the sea and landed. The challenge of supplying the invading army was as great as the challenge of landing it in the first place, and it was a challenge that would determine the success or failure of the entire enterprise. The natural solution to the problem of supply would be to use a port. Ports are designed for exactly this purpose, with docks and facilities that allow ships to unload their cargo efficiently. A port could handle the volume of supplies needed to sustain the invading army, allowing ships to dock and unload in an organized and efficient manner. But there was a fundamental problem. The ports of the occupied coast were held by the enemy, and they were among the most heavily defended positions of all. The enemy understood the importance of the ports and had fortified them heavily, making their capture extraordinarily difficult and costly. And even if a port were captured, the enemy was likely to destroy its facilities before withdrawing, leaving it useless. This created the dilemma that the Allies faced. They needed a port to supply the invading army, but the ports were heavily defended and likely to be destroyed if captured. Relying on capturing a functioning port was too risky, too uncertain. If the invasion depended on quickly seizing an intact port, and that port could not be taken or was destroyed, the entire enterprise could fail for lack of supply. The Allies needed a solution that did not depend on capturing one of the enemy's heavily defended ports, a way to supply the army that they could control and rely upon. And the solution they devised was breathtaking in its audacity. Now, we should be honest about the history here, because the artificial harbors are a real and remarkable part of the history of the war, and the story deserves to be told with accuracy. What follows is grounded in the genuine historical record of these artificial harbors, though we will tell it as a narrative to convey its full significance. The core is true. The Allies really did construct massive artificial harbors, building them in sections that were towed across the sea and assembled off the invasion beaches to provide the port facilities needed to supply the invading army. The details are recounted to convey the scale and ingenuity of this extraordinary engineering achievement. The solution the Allies devised was to build their own harbors, artificial ports that could be constructed in advance, transported to the invasion beaches, and assembled there to provide the facilities needed to unload supplies. This was an engineering undertaking of colossal scale and ambition. The artificial harbors would consist of massive components, breakwaters to create sheltered water, piers and roadways to allow ships to unload and supplies to be moved ashore. These enormous structures would be built in sections, transported across the sea, and assembled off the coast to create functioning harbors where none had existed before. The scale of this undertaking was staggering. The components of the artificial harbors were enormous, massive structures that had to be constructed, transported, and assembled. Building these huge components required vast resources and effort, a major industrial undertaking in itself. And then these enormous structures had to be towed across the sea to the invasion beaches, a logistical challenge of immense proportions. Moving such massive components across the water, getting them to the right place, was an extraordinary feat in its own right. The entire enterprise represented engineering and logistics on a scale rarely attempted. The components of the harbors served various functions, working together to create functioning ports. Some components formed breakwaters, creating areas of sheltered water where ships could anchor and unload, protected from the open sea. This was crucial, for without sheltered water, the rough conditions of the open sea would make unloading difficult or impossible. Other components formed the piers and floating roadways that allowed ships to dock and unload their cargo, and that allowed the supplies to be moved from the ships to the shore. Together, these components created artificial harbors that could handle the flow of supplies needed to sustain the invading army. The assembly of the harbors off the invasion beaches was a complex and demanding operation. The components towed across the sea had to be positioned and assembled correctly to create the functioning harbors. This required careful planning and execution, the coordination of an enormous logistical effort to bring the components together and assemble them in the right configuration. The assembly had to be carried out in the difficult conditions off the invasion beaches, in the aftermath of the landings, as the great enterprise of the invasion unfolded. It was a remarkable operation, the assembly of entire harbors from components towed across the sea. Once assembled, the artificial harbors provided the port facilities that were so crucial to the success of the invasion. They allowed supplies to be unloaded efficiently in the quantities needed to sustain the invading army. The continuous flow of supplies that an army of that size required could now be maintained, flowing through the artificial harbors to the troops ashore. The harbors solved the problem of supply that had threatened the entire enterprise, providing a reliable means of sustaining the army that did not depend on capturing one of the enemy's heavily defended ports. They were a crucial enabler of the invasion's success. The importance of the artificial harbors to the success of the invasion is difficult to overstate. The supply of the invading army was a fundamental challenge, one that could have determined the success or failure of the entire enterprise. By providing reliable port facilities, the artificial harbors helped ensure that the army could be supplied, that it could fight and advance, that the invasion could succeed. They were one of the key factors that made the Great Invasion possible, an engineering achievement that directly enabled one of the most important military operations in history. Without them, the challenge of supply might have proven insurmountable. What does the story of the artificial harbors reveal about problem-solving and ingenuity? First and foremost, it demonstrates the power of audacious, unconventional thinking to solve problems that seem insoluble. The problem of supplying the invading army without capturing a port seemed to have no good solution through conventional means. But by thinking audaciously, by conceiving of the radical idea of building and transporting artificial harbors, the Allies found a solution. This illustrates how the most difficult problems can sometimes be solved by bold, unconventional thinking, by a willingness to consider radical solutions that conventional thinking would dismiss as impossible. The story also illustrates the importance of not being constrained by conventional assumptions. The conventional assumption would be that to supply an army, you need a port, and to get a port, you need to capture one. The Allies broke free of this assumption, recognizing that if they could not capture a port, they could build one. This willingness to challenge the conventional assumption, to recognize that there might be another way, was crucial to finding the solution. It illustrates the value of questioning the assumptions that limit our thinking, of being willing to consider possibilities that lie outside the conventional framework. Consider, too, the extraordinary planning and foresight that the artificial harbors represented. The harbors had to be conceived, designed, and built in advance, long before the invasion, requiring planners to anticipate the problem of supply and to develop the solution ahead of time. This kind of foresight, this ability to anticipate a challenge and prepare an audacious solution in advance, was a remarkable achievement of planning. The artificial harbors were not an improvised response to an unexpected problem, but a carefully planned solution, conceived and prepared in advance through foresight and meticulous planning. This reflects the importance of anticipating challenges and preparing for them. There is a broader lesson here about the role of engineering and logistics in great endeavors. We often focus on the dramatic, visible aspects of military operations, the battles and the heroism. But behind these visible aspects lies the crucial work of engineering and logistics, the often unglamorous but essential effort to make great operations possible. The artificial harbors were a triumph of engineering and logistics, an achievement that, while less visible than the drama of the landings, was no less crucial to the success of the invasion. This illustrates the vital importance of the engineering and logistical work that underpins great endeavors, the essential foundation on which dramatic successes are built. It is worth reflecting on the sheer ambition of the artificial harbors, the boldness of conceiving and executing such a colossal undertaking. The idea of building entire harbors, transporting them across the sea, and assembling them off a hostile coast was breathtakingly ambitious, an undertaking of a scale and audacity rarely attempted. That the Allies conceived of such a solution and then actually executed it speaks to a remarkable boldness and ambition. This willingness to attempt something so audacious, to undertake an engineering challenge of such magnitude, was essential to solving the problem of supply. The ambition of the enterprise was matched only by the importance of what it achieved. Consider as well the collaborative effort that the artificial harbors required, the coordination of countless individuals and resources to achieve the colossal undertaking. Building, transporting, and assembling the harbors required the efforts of many people, the marshaling of vast resources, the coordination of a complex enterprise. The artificial harbors were a collective achievement, the product of the combined efforts of many, brought together in pursuit of a common goal. This collaborative dimension, the coordination of a vast effort to achieve a colossal undertaking, is an important aspect of the achievement, a reminder of what can be accomplished through coordinated collective effort. The story of the artificial harbors stands as one of the great engineering achievements of the entire war, a testament to the power of audacious thinking and meticulous planning to solve a problem that seemed insoluble. It demonstrated what could be accomplished through bold, unconventional thinking, through the willingness to attempt something of colossal scale and ambition. The artificial harbors made possible the success of the greatest invasion in history, enabling the supply of the invading army and helping to ensure the success of the entire enterprise. They stand as a lasting monument to engineering ingenuity and audacious problem-solving. By the end of the war, the artificial harbors had taken their place among the great engineering achievements of the conflict, a remarkable solution to one of the most challenging problems of the greatest invasion in history. They had provided the crucial port facilities that allowed the invading army to be supplied, enabling its success and contributing to the liberation of occupied Europe. The artificial harbors stood as a testament to the power of audacious thinking, the importance of meticulous planning, and the extraordinary feats of engineering that helped make possible the triumph of the great invasion. So remember the artificial harbors, the colossal structures that the Allies built and towed across the sea to supply the greatest invasion in history. Remember the problem they solved, the crucial challenge of supplying a massive invading army without capturing one of the enemy's heavily defended ports. Remember the audacity of the solution, the breathtaking idea of building entire harbors, transporting them across the sea, and assembling them off a hostile coast. And remember the lessons the story teaches about the power of audacious, unconventional thinking to solve insoluble problems, about the importance of challenging conventional assumptions, and about the vital role of engineering and logistics in making possible the great endeavors that shape history.